Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today I think I'm going to take another stab at this flat earth thing. I'm not even sure where this whole thing happened for me personally. I feel like it was in December of 2015 where I first saw it, and then by, I would say, end of winter 2016, headed into spring, I met a few people who were dealing with it as well. And now we keep looking at the new videos that come out, and you know, you have sort of a dividing into a couple different groups, all very interesting, all extremely interesting as to how many people have probably converted for the rest of their lives, minus any conclusive proof that's, you know, to the contrary. But you have scientific people really getting at a lot of the geometry and a lot of the, well, how do the stars do this? How do they do that? And then you have individuals conducting physical experiments as best they can and, you know, trying to prove it that way. I'm going to drop a couple notions on you guys during this episode that I don't see people really talking about. And then we're just going to try to go through a lot of what I've seen since my last episode on it. Oddly enough, there really isn't a tremendous amount of new evidence that's come around. I mean, there's new ideas on how to check things out. A lot of the evidence that was submitted in the last couple years has pretty much held up. But what's fascinating about it, as we always say on this show, is that you have people who didn't have any scientific knowledge in these areas, and now they do because of the flat earth theory. And I think that that in itself is very valuable. As Jed said, you know, you can ask a person why it's round and they've got maybe one answer, because everyone believes it is. And then you ask a person why it's flat, and they will talk for hours and hours and hours about why they think it's flat. And I think it's interesting that the knee-jerk reaction is to say truth is really defined in pop culture as who believes a particular thing the most. Well, then that must be true. You know, when I was a kid, they were just transforming the whole Charlotte Iserby thing. I was in Massachusetts, and the mispronunciation of words started to become this prevalent formula for how we speak words and pronounce words in English. But if you just study how vowels and consonants work together and follow the rules, I mean, I'm not trying to be a rule monger, but there are very specific ways to speak. And it was just this thing where my father was taught well when he was young how to speak, and so he knew how words are supposed to be spoken. And when I would come home and say them wrong, he'd say, "Why are you saying it that way? It's really this way. Look at the way it's spelled." And he would show me other words that made the words I was saying wrong. So he'd correct me, and I'd go back, and I'd tell, you know, the English teacher, I'd say, "I think I'm saying this word wrong." "Oh, no, you're not saying it wrong, because I say it the same way." And then they got out all these dictionaries. I mean, literally one day in 6th grade, well, I guess it was 7th grade, got out all these dictionaries, 6 of them, laid them down, and the word dissect was actually in there as dissect. Everyone says dissect today, but they are utterly and completely wrong. It's weird. Words like data are really data. The A makes the A long. The second A makes the first A long because it's only separated by a single consonant. The reason why I go through that is because we are allowing mass ignorance to potentially influence our complete take on life. Well, we all believe it's round. None of us were there when we determined it was round. And so I guess it is. And as long as a space agency, who is now utterly notorious for stealing money and faking missions and faking science, can say, oh, we're going to corroborate mass opinion because all we care about is our paycheck. We do not care about integrity. NASA is not an organization built out of individuals that care about the integral proof of what they've done. You have, as far as I can tell, at least 51% of the company is made out of those nerds that are the nerds that don't care whether or not they really have the ability to do what they say they can do or the knowledge that they say they have. They just want to control and be famous for whatever little nerdy thing that they do. They do not care. In my 20s, I used to go to the strip joint. I've only been to one in my entire life, and I went to it for several months because a bunch of us guys from the gaming industry were going there. And NASA was very close, up in the Bay Area. And we get these NASA scientists coming into this place. It's a very, very famous place. I don't even know if it still exists, called the Brass Rail. And there was a guy that would come in with the most massive comb-over you've ever seen in your life. He was absolutely bald on top, but he had rocker hair, twice as long as mine. But I only had it growing on one half of his head. And he would swoop that stuff over, go all the way down to almost his waist on the other side of his body. And when you looked at him, you know, you were thinking, wow, he actually is there doing this as if no one can tell. Always had lots of money because he was a scientist at NASA. But I want you to think about the guy with the 4-foot comb over when you think about NASA employees. It doesn't fucking matter to these people. They live in a bubble of absolute fucking crazy and self-denial. And this is where we get our authority for how the world and the universe works. Now, hey, place could be round, place could be flat. The point is, we have to figure out how we get information, who we get it from. And, you know, you'll get these groups of society that most of you have a friend that is very against any criticism / reality of people. You can find a person doing something very ridiculous and reprehensible, and they don't care. They'll tell you you shouldn't say anything bad about another human being. And it's not that you're trying to say something bad about them, it's just you're trying to acknowledge what they're doing. Wow, look at that. Isn't that weird? We shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be doing that. Oh, well, don't you dare criticize the pedophile touching the child. You don't know what he's thinking. You don't know, right? I have a friend of mine that won't let me use hypotheticals. And I keep trying to tell her, I said, yeah, this is the way the whole world has discovered and pioneered reality. This is the absolute basis of all scientific method and philosophical advancement, is to create hypotheticals and analyze them until they can become realities. Until maybe perhaps through a hypothetical we can create an experiment by which we can prove what we're thinking. But if it were up to her, the whole place would be just as matter of fact and now as man used to be before man got conquered by those who could think better. So Flat Earth. The Flat Earth community is very interesting because I think that we have a lot of dedicated souls trying to prove it one way or the other. And it is just fascinating how utterly different the people are who are heavily involved with this. You know, the most, I think, typical group of people that you would assume to find are the super evangelical Christians, where they just, at will, parse words out of the Bible to serve the Flat Earth movement. I mean, they will take a single word that's been translated 5 or 6 times and then almost use it in a conversation to prove flat earth, as if that's what God or Christ or whomever wrote the Bible meant, you know. And hey, I guess there's a potential that they're right. You have groups conducting these experiments that are actually physical experiments, and the most popular ones, of course, are putting cameras on weather balloons and then setting them way up in the air, trying to prove that the world is flat. Now, I went through a laborious process of trying to figure out how far up you'd have to be before any sort of resolution eye, whether it be your human being or some sort of digital camera, could see the curvature of the Earth. And what I came up with is 80 miles up is sort of the base of elevation that one would have to achieve to start seeing pronounced curves in the surface of the Earth. But these hot air balloons, they can only go up, you know, maybe 100,000 and some change feet, which is very impressive. But when you take the overall diameter of the Earth and divide that into the height that these weather balloons achieve, then you're not going to see curvature. It's there if it's there, but you won't be able to really see it with your eyeballs, because the rods and the cones in your eye do not have enough resolution to register the bend at the edge of the horizon. Now, like I said before, and this is really tough to do unless you do a lot of pre-calculations ahead of time, but the most telling curvature is the curvature in front of your face. How far should you be able to see straight ahead when elevated before the curvature should take away the landmass? And you know what you would have to do in that particular case is to do your weather balloon experiment, which the problem is that it keeps spinning. You know, usually these things spin. People are getting pretty good at building these things such that the apparatus can spin, but the camera stays pretty stationary. So I've been really impressed by a lot of the hard work that's gone into these things. And I think eventually they're going to get it. They're going to prove it one way or the other. But I grew up in a little hometown that was 100 miles from every major city. And so obviously standing on a big ridge, I should not be able to see 100 miles away. Curvature of the Earth would prevent that from occurring. Now, there's obviously a differential calculation for how high you are looking down on something versus being flat and level. Western Kansas is probably one of the most amazing places in the world to be if you're going to test flat Earth theory, because it is so flat in Western Kansas that on average day you do not feel like you're in reality. I mean, what's really wild is you pull the car over and you just start looking around, and you may get up on your car, look around, and it looks cartoonish. It looks completely like a firmament dome. How these people didn't, have some weird Amish sect that believed that we were in a firmament dome, I don't know. I mean, you would wake up every single day almost completely disoriented with no mountains in the distance, no hills, no valleys, just whatever crop you're growing, and they're so efficient at growing wheat. It makes it even more bizarre and more amazing that you see just these flat plains of wheat, and you see a blue sky with just animated clouds up there. It's crazy. But these elevation experiments don't go high up enough, and they won't. And I'm not sure why anyone would invest in them unless there's some other strategy to find out the curvature, be it straightforward, probably, a vanishing point straight ahead. Because right now they could double the altitude of these experiments and still be incapable of seeing the curvature, right? When you take 80 and you divide it by 8,000, for instance, you're in a fraction of a % of altitude over the surface of the Earth. And if you expect to see curvature, you're kidding yourself. 80 miles is the first point where you could be able to use scientific instruments of photography to register this stuff. So let me throw at you a different tact here. What I'm going to show it, basically give you is an idea that I think we can use to prove or disprove flat Earth. But this is a theme of thinking that I want you guys to use for all the evidence either way, right? So the South Pole. The South Pole is the focal point of a lot of the research, right? Because on one side of the fence, the South Pole is a continent, 12,000 miles around roughly. And, it's a very jagged, edged thing. It's not like it's some perfect circle down there. Currently, by the way, in 2017, it is now bigger. I saw in one report, bigger and more frozen today than it has been in recorded history. So much for global warming, right? But on the other hand, of the flat Earth side of things, you have not a continent, but a border, right? This border that goes all the way around the Earth, and it's a big ice barrier, just like Game of Thrones animation at the beginning. Now, what's on the other side of that barrier? We don't know. Could be more ice, could be lush land, could be a temporal anomaly, could be heaven, could be a dome, a wall where you go up and you can knock on it. We don't know. But in order for it to be a border, there's a very distinct mathematical difference. For it to be an island / continent, it's 12,000 miles around. For it to be the smallest border that we can estimate, according to like the UN logo, for instance, it should be 60,000 miles around. Supposedly Captain Cook navigated down to it and got all the way around it after several years of miscalculations because he thought he was going around a continent and he was going on the inside of a border. He made it 60,000 miles. All right. Well, even with errors, 60,000 miles is a lot longer than 12,000 miles. Right? We're talking 48,000 miles more around this thing. So 4 times longer around this thing than just the base circumference of the continent of the South Pole, of Antarctica, right? But this is where we come into some easy science. If you want to prove that the world is flat, let me give you another test you can do. It's a little difficult, but it's very interesting. It's difficult and it's easy, depending on what kind of person you are and what resources you have. Now, what if I said to you, you think my house is a 1,200 square foot house. I've given you a map of my house. And the only way that you're going to really confirm it's 1,200 square feet, even if I lock the front door and say you're not allowed inside, you could walk the perimeter of my house, right? And okay, yeah, I see. It looks like a bathroom window. There's a sliding glass doors. I can see inside. But if I said to you, well, my 1,200 square foot house is really a 6,000 square foot house. Now, I'm telling you that. Or you've heard a rumor that that's the case. I'm still telling you it's 1,200. But the neighbor's like, no, dude, this thing's like 6,000. You don't even know. It's huge. Now, the only thing you would have to do to prove that it's a 6,000 square foot house without being able to gain entry, meaning you're not allowed to step onto the Antarctic continent because of all these treaties that were passed, right, in the early 50s. All you would need to do is walk around the perimeter of my house. And perhaps with the cell phone, start taking pictures of weird little turns and strange things and balconies and big long straightaways of walls that in themselves, just to turn it into a box would be more than 1,200 square feet. Now, some of the estimates I've seen in other videos put the wall around Earth at 100,000 miles. All right, that's 88,000 miles longer than this recorded, supposedly, continent of Antarctica. Now, don't forget the old map that was copied in, 1309 from a previous map that, has the Antarctic completely mapped out without snow on it, of which NASA has said is accurate. And it was longitudinal and latitudinal correct, which I guess longitude was not invented by then, according to the white man. But we should be able to sail a boat near the coast, at least in visible range of the coast of Antarctica, and just record what we see. And according to Flat Earth, the most conservative estimate, which I think Eric Dubé stops around 60,000 miles, you're going to be looking at potentially 80+%, 85% roughly, of every surface anomaly you see when you are sailing around Antarctica will be of protrusions and inlets and various land anomalies that have never existed in any map. Because according to Flat Earth people, 85% of the continental coastline of the border hasn't been discovered or revealed through Google Earth or any other mapping process, right? So that is a theme of thinking that I think that we can apply to Flat Earth experimentation. Now, I will tell you that what's interesting about it is that we have, in my close friends here, you have folks that I have friends of mine that are completely convinced it's flat, for all kinds of reasons. But they also kind of have no ability to grasp gravity as an ethereal wind, right? And what's funny is I'll say, well, I believe it's round due to expanding Earth at a minimum. Now, it could be that expanding Earth could somehow achieve itself on a disk. I'm totally open to that, but I haven't heard anyone attempt that sort of explanation. But I'll show the video, the Neil Adams video of the world ripping apart and how much it makes sense with all the history that we have heard. The Age of the Ocean experiments, which have nothing to do with conspiracy. These German scientists had figured out that the oceans are no more than 65 million years old when they reversed the level of salt in the water. As it gains more and more today, they just reverse the algorithm back exponentially inverted, and they find out that the oceans aren't that old. But I'll hear people say, oh, that expanding Earth thing, that's bullshit. And I don't know what kind of mind can look at the experiment of Neil Adams and instantaneously say that that's bullshit. It would seem as difficult to believe as anyone saying one way or the other round or flat. The Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, on all maps that have any sort of contour to them, on all Google Earth stuff, which is derived from satellite photographs that are ancient or high altitude photographs, there is a seam right down the center of both oceans, matching the shape of the continents on both sides. With those seams down the center, you have to bring it all back together. And then again, you get a ball that's really small, 1/4 the size of Earth. 1/4 the size of disturbance in ethereal winds, and thus 1/4 the gravity that we have today. Now, there's been some incredible research by the Flat Earth community about the fact that the sun sets. The sun setting is the #1 reason why people, I think, on Earth believe that it is round. And this idea that the bottom disappears from hotels and ships and all this other stuff. Now, what's interesting is there's a bit of a conflict inside of the Flat Earth community for this evidence, because people have been telling you in the Flat Earth community that the hull of the ship does not disappear first, that the bottom of the hotels and cityscapes of Chicago are not really missing from the photograph. And they are. They completely are, right? But this individual studied and I apologize for not knowing his name, he studied all the science that basically is kind of above board, saying that the atmosphere acts like a lens. The refractional correction of light paths to your eyeball on a surface like ours, could be flat. Changes its angle, changes what you can see. He had this table experiment, which I'll try to insert over my talking here, where he essentially bought a filter that represented the same type of refraction that they're talking about with light inside of an atmosphere with water in it. And he had a light in the background pretending to be the sun. And as he pulled this lens back towards the sun, or maybe he pulled it forward, I can't remember, the sun set in the camera filming the light. So it looked like the flashlight light bulb was actually sinking on the other side of the horizon. And at that moment, you realize that what you're so certain about may need a little bit more analysis. Now, one of the tough things about being a flat earther, I think, is that by changing this one perception of the world from heliocentric to a disk, surrounded by a barrier of ice, which we know is the Antarctica, you immediately challenge a tremendous amount of other, commonly believed things in the world, right? And so all you really want to do is prove that it's flat, it doesn't rotate, and that potentially there is something much bigger going on by us being here, right? But now, before you get a chance to prove that first level of claim, the problem for you is that now people are running at you with everything else that is heliocentric globe evidence in their repertoire, right? Moon missions, Mars missions, all of the satellites that go up into space. And so now you're overwhelmed trying to fend off everything, and you try to quickly divide up your resources. Hey, why don't you go handle this? I'll go handle this, and we'll all meet back. But really what your focus is trying to prove that it's flat. What's interesting and frustrating is that you get out there, and perhaps you were never a science guy, you were never a space person, you never paid 2 cents at the moon missions, right? But the second you start listening to people who are bringing up this flat earth thing, and they start showing you these computer rendered pictures of satellites around Earth with horrible versions of the Earth underneath, depending on what decade you're looking at these photographs, then all of a sudden you're sort of awake and disenfranchised to these other agencies. You're starting to go, man, I never knew that NASA lied so much. I never even thought about NASA when I was thinking about whether or not the world was flat or round, but now it's in my face. What the hell? Am I the only one paying attention? Have you ever had that feeling when you're watching a sports game when either the player or the referee either plays badly or has a bad call, and you think to yourself, gosh, I saw it. I saw it as a complete rookie that this wasn't the way to do the play or this wasn't the way to do the call. And those people are 100% dedicated to that profession, and they can't get it remotely right. It's an anomaly, that's created through just mistakes that people make. We think that they shouldn't have the ability to make mistakes, but it's just that weird feeling. And when you wake up to some of these conspiracy truths, you are saddled with this almost jaw-dropping day-to-day moment, this feeling of, what the hell? Was everyone asleep when this stuff was happening? How has the moon missions been allowed to stick around for 50 years when the evidence was right in our face? Now, the truth of the matter is they were geniuses in the 60s and were able to essentially throw one over the wall in a way that, the intellect of that time was unable to track what they did. But now we have plenty of software. Plenty of software to pick everything apart. The other one is that we have sort of experiments that I don't think actually prove anything necessarily, because they're working in like relative gravity, bubbles in a way that people don't understand it. things would still behave the same way on a round ball as it would on a flat disc. And one of them is using a level. And this idea that you can take a level in, say, Kansas, level it out, get in your car, drive to California, which should be tipping quite a bit from where you are, and it's still level. And so they think, oh, that's proof. It's like, no, that's not proof. Even on a heliocentric ball with ethereal gravity, the bubble that's in your little doodad is getting adjusted as you turn, right? The gravity is identical in proportion in Kansas as it is in California. You're level to the tangent of the curve at best, but you're still level to the tangent of the curve. It will not be changed. Now, the gyroscope is a completely different thing. Why someone hasn't spun a gyroscope in Miami, Florida? Just get in a truck, an RV, spin a gyroscope. Hell, make sure you spin 10 of them. Just keep them powered. Drive from Miami all the way to Los Angeles and take a look. Get inside a commercial jet. Just bring a little gyroscope box, some little tiny thing. Everyone get on a flight in London and turn on your gyroscopes and go to Cairo. Go to Madrid. Come to America. Go to the Virgin Islands. Really cross about 50% of the curvature of the Earth, and that thing should be on its side, because it's going to stay perpendicular to London, and as the plane goes around the edge, it's just going to continue turning inside your chamber. Why the hell do we have to rely on scientists or pilots to tell us what these things are doing? Or gyroscopes hard to find? The other one that I'm actually really surprised we haven't seen are engineering students using 3D software to test a lot of the theories of how would things behave attached to a ball. This is big as the Earth with 1g. So you have to dial in the 1g of gravity towards the center of this ball. Again, we want to recreate their claim before we try to do anything else different. Spin it 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. See what happens, engineers. Let's put an atmosphere on that. And let's see how, with gravity pulling on the atmosphere and then turning the ball, how would we see the atmosphere behave? Because, I'm staring straight ahead out my backyard and I'm looking at some pretty fluffy clouds, and they're not really moving that fast. I mean, they're moving on a minute detail, but it's not flying by my head. And I'm sure that those clouds are anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 feet in the air, at least, right? Not a lot of detail up there. Well, on a flat Earth, that makes complete sense, right? Who knows what makes the atmosphere turn in a flat Earth? Is it the sun whizzing by, the moon whizzing by? What makes it happen? The sun is almost directly overhead right now. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, let's see what happens. College students are going to college for special effects, and they have access to all kinds of, water plugins in Maya. All right. Dial one up. Turn it into atmosphere. Get into Terrigen 4. Take a look. Move it around. We really haven't done anything but scratch the surface of trying to prove that flat Earth is one way or the other, right? But the other side that's very interesting, and it continues to manifest, is the spiritual side of the implications of a flat Earth. That once you believe that the world is round, you supposedly have lost your entire connection to God. And once you believe it to be flat, you have regained your full communion with the Creator. Now, the weird thing about this whole spiritual side of this thing is that, for me personally, when I hear people say, and I saw this yesterday in a couple comments, and people saying, if you believe in the ball, you have lived your entire life feeling insignificant, as if God is either not there or so distant from us, from you, that you just have no ability to be spiritual. And what's really strange is I grew up thinking it was round my whole life, for sure, without any question, and never felt like I was alienated from God, nor insignificant. I guess the notion is that if the world was, round and there's a bunch of galaxies out there, that supposedly, if a lot of life forms have been created in the universe, that God has an inability to remember you personally. There's just too many people in the universe, and you don't get loving care. And I've done a lot of spiritual stuff lately in the episodes, and part of it for me is to say, well, if you believe in God, and especially sort of a biblical God with the firmament quotations in it, God used to walk around this planet a lot. He used to be here. He used to tell us to do stuff, usually pretty outrageous things, but he was here, if you believe it. And without the world changing its size or shape. Because if you believe it's flat, you believe it's always been flat. And it doesn't matter if a bunch of people think it's round. It's still flat, and God would still be hanging out. But he doesn't, since the printing press, God has not made it a commonality to come down and say hello. Joseph Smith being one of the only people to claim otherwise, right? I think that there's a flaw in man, which is a very interesting, subtle flaw in the way that we behave, and it's obviously socially conditioned into us. But one of these things is, if you have ever been afraid of something, maybe you've been afraid of something your entire lifetime, there's a bizarre thing that some humans believe that everyone has also been afraid of the same thing. And once they have figured out how to get past their fears, they are so overjoyed with that experience that they rush outside and start screaming the solution to everyone else, when most people aren't scared of it. And I think it has to do with the same chamber in the brain that has to mature, which is that moment when you were a kid and someone said to you, just because it's raining outside, honey, it's not raining where your grandma lives. May not be raining down the street. Just because it's hot here doesn't mean it's hot everywhere in the world. And your brain has to go to like this global perspective in order to understand that. And so I see that same sort of immature circuit when someone starts to try and tell me that, boy, I bet you felt super insignificant just because you thought the world was round. Again, Douglas Adams in Hitchhiker's Guide, he does a really interesting job talking about the total perspective vortex, which is a comical torture device of which Zaphod Beeblebrox was actually put inside of. He's the only one that really survived it, but it normally fries the mind of a person that goes into it because it shows you the total perspective of your insignificant mass and energy as compared to an infinite universe. And I'm going to do another little Hitchhiker's Guide reference here, because this might actually make some of you some money. As I said in a previous episode, one of the big things that they did in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was they built this computer, ironically called Deep Thought, and it was to generate the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And it thought for something like 7 million years, 11 million years, whatever it was, and all these generations of people that hooked it up kept, spawning and spawning and spawning until it finally gave up its answer, and everyone's waiting outside. They're all having a big giant parade. They're just waiting for the answer, and the computer wakes up and he tells them, I got your answer, but I don't think you're going to like it. And they're like, oh, but you must tell us. He goes, you're really not going to like it. Oh, but you have to. He goes, okay, here it comes. And he does this huge thing, and he says the answer is 42. And they're like, what? Are you kidding me? 42? What is that? He says, I think the problem is that you haven't really figured out what the question is. And this is what Earth is, right? Earth is the computer that generates the question. But everything got messed up, so they never really get the question. Now, the association with Flat Earth is this. when they heard that it was going to take 7 to 11 million years to come up with the answer, he said, don't worry, you guys just go out there and write about what answer it might be. Why don't you argue back and forth as to whether or not it matters? Make yourself a tremendous amount of money. Get on some lecture circuit where you can talk and talk and talk about the answer and your descendants and your descendants. You'll make a tremendous amount of money just talking about what I might say at the end of the day. What I haven't seen is someone really take on the flat earth from a literary standpoint, being fair, right, to say, will we ever know what shape the world is? Have the guts to say NASA's a bunch of lying assholes, right? That you don't have the evidence that you think you have. And then you got to bust the balls of those doing experiments in the flat earth side to shake out the ones that are ludicrous. You know, again, hot air balloons that are never going to see the curvature of the earth. It's a pointless exercise until you can get the guys in Utah who did the, what is it, the rocket that went 73 kilometers up or something like that. That's getting close. That's getting real close. But you got to convince those people with those experiments to stop putting fisheye lenses on their cameras. You know, you got to teach them technology where it's like your rocket's going to be spinning around like crazy, and we have to either put a camera unit in there that's on some, you know, spindle that won't rotate in proportion to the way that the fuselage is rotating. But there's a whole philosophy according to Flat Earth that no one's really engaged just yet. Perhaps it's in the works. I think the episodes I've made on Flat Earth would probably be a pretty good primer for such a book. It's going to take some dedication, though. I think, too, if you're a Flat Earth enthusiast, your biggest challenge is to not embarrass yourself. With some of the material I've mentioned at the beginning of this episode, but I think that the photographic proof of let's just say there's a lot of people that show photographs locally here on the surface of the earth, and of course the beach looks flat, the desert looks flat, etc., etc., as if it would look any different on a round sphere. It would look just like that. So if you put out a bunch of stuff that is sort of it doesn't really prove anything, then you're injuring your movement, you're injuring the conversation that you would rather have. So my thing is to stick with your smoking guns. If you're going to stick with flat earth theory, you've got to stick with the gyroscopes. You've got to get someone who's not on a telephone interview to say, look, I studied as a sniper, I studied as an artillery guy, I was in the Navy, and we can't shoot anything we can't see. There is no Coriolis effect, calculation, correction, differential in our calculations. We simply can only shoot what we can see. Because all the interviews I've ever heard are some dude on the phone. Never the guy in the studio. Or the big guy in the studio who talked to someone on the phone or talked to someone in person. We've got to get some of these people to come out and say, you know, I was in Desert Storm, I was in the whatever invasion for 10 years, and at no point do we calculate for the curvature of the earth. The other thing I've seen is that for the experiments that I see that are people doing balloon experiments and long-range photography experiments, the posses that come together to conduct these experiments are usually a high percentage of people who are very serious, very informed, non-emotional people that just want to get to the bottom of the question. And then they allow in sort of these, you know, transient folks that are just kind of walking through town. And they could give a shit if anything goes correctly. They don't really understand the experiment. They like being a part of a movement. And they're just dead weight. They create more confusion than clarity. And so, I mean, one of the footnotes I would say to you guys is if you're going to get into experiments, I think you should become damn near militant about who gets in and who doesn't. And I think you should set a cap. You know, what if you only, to launch a weather balloon, it only takes 5 people. So there you go. There's a 5-person cap. Oh, sure. You're more than welcome to watch over there. You're not welcome to touch anything, to contribute. You're not to be standing around looking at the metrics coming in. And then just cap it. Once you fill the 5 positions with 5 serious candidates, that's it. You don't look for a 6th. Even if someone's contributing money. If they are astute, they get to be a part of the system. If not, they just have to be a silent investor, and you report back via phone or whatever how you're doing. I saw probably one of the cooler experiments, and it was the second one of this particular team, and they had built a pretty ingenious unit, but they lost the camera. They had 2 cameras, one on the bottom, one on the top. The one on the bottom was getting all this incredible footage, but when it popped, the camera basically ripped off of this thing. It could have been the wire, the cord, getting stuck around the bottom and literally just yanking this thing off of its main mount. But they did a brilliant job putting this thing together, and they actually had altimeters reporting down to the earth. They had a satellite dish they could point directly at there's a satellite wand they could point directly at the balloon and get data and get the live feed from the camera. And so even though they lost the camera, they have a lot of excerpts of what they were seeing. The camera up above stopped at 40,000 feet, but the eventual altitude was like 118,000 feet. But now the group of folks that put this thing together and launched it, it was pure fucking chaos. I mean, it was so tough to watch. A bunch of people with selfie cams, and just, it went on for, it was almost real time. And believe me, they're not Jimmy Fallon trying to keep you entertained properly. So I think that when this kind of stuff gets produced like that, there seems to be so many voices going around and so many people off kilter, and you have the 3 or 4 guys that are all into the me show, right? They don't give a shit if you see anything about the flat earth. They just want their face on the internet because they have such injured souls, right? That you can't focus on what's going on. It doesn't need a personal twist to it, right? If I ever personally launch one of these things, I'm out of the game. I'll say hello at the very beginning. This is what we're going to do. I'll give you a little tour of the hardware, and then once we launch, if we're going to do anything real time, it's going to be me taking all the data and putting it in some composite screens so you can see it, and then you make your own decision. Maybe you can chat in the chat thing, but it's not going to be me filming myself the whole time trying to be funny. So I think that I've seen another one in the UK, I believe, where they were trying to film a person rowing down a famous stream, which I think was used in the past to prove the world was flat. And it just got it was a super hot, muggy day, and so by the time the kid got down there, the refraction off the steamy water was just killing it. Because the original experiment was done in winter-ish, fall, spring time frame, so it was sort of not frozen, but very dry air, right? But that particular group seemed to be just so willy-nilly. People were bringing random hardware, random cameras to the thing, and no one was taking inventory of, okay, there's certain experiments we can do with these really high-end cameras. Who is serious about this? Who knows how to actually take a picture? And it just looked like some kid had, scrounged up $600 and was didn't know how to hold a camera still. People would show up to events like this with their batteries nearly empty. I mean, how crazy ignorant is that? Don't bring your camera if you don't have the wherewithal to charge it the night before. And if you wake up in the morning and find out you didn't charge it, don't bring it. You can't charge it and use it in the time frame that the experiment's going to happen. So just cut your losses, man. Just go there and watch and stay out of the experiment. Don't mess anything up. So, I've been harping recently on the video that I saw recently that was trying to say that, I think it was Truth is Stranger Than Fiction channel. I think that may be the guy. He's the one that said, stay ignorant. God will punish you if you learn about him. That's what the Tower of Babel experiment was all about, that man tried to reach into the sky, and God, being the fucking baby that he is, creates 12 tribes, 12 different languages, and we're all confused, warring for the rest of time, right? And he put a point on it that he believes that's the way the world works, which means his channel in my mind just turns off permanently, right? Anyone who believes such an asinine thing doesn't have any other information for me to take, right? But that sentiment has been around lightly. I mean, I've rarely ever heard that sentiment where it's God's an asshole on this almost intellectual level. But there are people out there that worry about finding the firmament dome, and that once you knock on the wall, it's all hell breaks loose. You weren't supposed to find the wall, and we got to reset the experiment. So there's going to be another fake Noah parable where everyone's wiped out and the place goes back to scratch, right? What if the big trick is just God takes you and plays hide and go seek? He just puts you in a world and you're supposed to find him. And that's the game. He's just hiding in the universe. It's not impossible. Obviously, he could keep us so far away we wouldn't be able to find him. And we could play hide and go seek with our kid and give him a plane ticket to Hawaii, and we're in Boston, and yeah, the kid's never going to find you. Not for decades. So that's not fun. You would play hide and go seek in the house. You know your kid can find you. But until your child does find you, your child can't see you. But they're not worried because they're like, this is fun. This is what I like to do. Mom's going to be cool. And you know what? I'm going to catch her. I'm going to catch her. And I'll be the winner. She'll be the loser. And then we're going to switch. And she'll be the winner and I'll be the loser. And it's this fun little game. There's this whole dilemma about God being, man being made in God's image. Because the question soon arises in your head, well, I like a fart joke. Does God like a fart joke? I like to do things that maybe aren't good for me. Does God do that too? I mean, how much am I made in God's image? If you ask a Mormon, they tell you that means that he's a white guy. He's Charlton Heston. They really believe that God's a white male and he has flesh and bone, and that's why you have to keep your flesh and bone into the next world. Which I guess if someone gets cremated, they think that you're fucked. You can't go anywhere. But, you want to think about the fact that why would God keep us in a petri dish? What's the point there? He could put us in a much bigger container, but he doesn't. He keeps us under this contact lens of container, which, in a way makes God kind of small. Now, maybe he's got like bubble wrap paper everywhere, right? And every little bubble is a new world, and we're all side by side, and maybe there's some, design flaw or design feature inside man that when we get around, hundreds of billions of others like us, it just goes to shit somehow. So it's better for us to be in this particular experiment. For those of you who've seen chemistry experiments where they will have those grids of little test tubes and you see the person doing the little, dose in every single one of these things, and then they put them off, or sometimes they shake them, sometimes they freeze them, whatever they do. They're trying to see how cultures grow overnight. Trying to do a DNA test. What if we are one of those little test tubes? Right? I guess one of the horrific notions that man can conceive of is that God doesn't give a shit about us at all. And it's not an absolute doesn't give a shit about us, because obviously somehow we're being maintained here, and I'm not necessarily saying this is true. But what if God sets it all up as a video game and walks off? It self-sustains. It really does self-sustain. Hey, and your reincarnation loop thing is going to happen too. That's just the way it works. I'm sure that there's some of you that have thought, okay, what if either God created us and was really actually walking around us more often, or an alien race made us and dropped us off and whatever. And did they sit around talking to us? Was the Nephilim and the Anunnaki and the Jinn and all these folks, were they here to help us get started and then they just take off? Like they don't want to see the fruits of their bounty? the fruits of their scientific experiment gone right? Have they just turned into UFO people? Talking to French guys in craters? But what if you find out that, we're here. We punch through the wall and we find the people on the other side. They're humanoid or humans, and they've been around longer. They have punched through their wall a million years ago. They have been visited by all the life forms in the universe that are in our region, and they discussed at great detail, and they simply tell you, well, it looks like the creator comes through periodically and creates things, and it won't come back in your timetable. You guys are going to have to exist on Earth for another million years before it comes around again. But whatever it is, this conversation with this alien race that's on the other side of the firmament wall isn't exactly uplifting. It's not negative in that there's any harm. They might tell you, but don't worry, there's a firmament dome over all of our areas. There's the water, and stars aren't really stars. Stars are these weird, particles up there. And once you go up high enough, you don't see them anymore. But we're safe. There's no meteorites or comets that are coming at us. You've completely misunderstood what those are. Planets, well, they're just these little tiny Chotskys. They don't really have any big role they play in our lives. So you won't have any cataclysmic event from space. All those things you think are craters, they're actually volcanoes. The moon, well, the moon's part of a node that holds us all together. We all have a white moon. It's crazy. We all have white moon. In fact, there's a rumor that way down over there's 2 white moons. But then their people are strange. They got 2 heads, whatever. Are you ready for information that could be on that level? Because there's this thing of like, okay, it's flat, then what? What's next? You find out it's flat. You knock on the firmament wall. How does it change your life? I've talked at length about this in previous episodes. And here's the main reason why I always go down the cerebral for flat Earth. Some of you are so passionate about flat Earth that you're dividing up your family friendships and your personal friendships. If someone doesn't believe or someone chastises you, you're losing your relationships with these individuals. In general, when you communicate with the world in, say, a public forum, YouTube, whatever, Facebook, you're losing connections there too. And you're starting to frown on mankind's intelligence due to your utter belief in flat Earth and what you believe to be smoking guns and their inability to see it after you show it to them. So if it's that important to you, and it could be that important to all of us, to be honest, if we knew the truth, then I say go balls to the wall. Go Richard Dreyfuss, Close Encounters. He didn't just see UFOs. He went home and built this shape of a pyramid in his living room until he figured out it was actually shaped like a devil's mountain. His wife took the kids and left. He never saw his wife and kids again, if you watch the extended version. He threw down. He found his answer. Now, I don't know how you find your answer on flat Earth besides somehow getting an expedition to cross the South Pole. One of the anomalies they keep saying is that they can't fly over the South Pole because the instruments get so cold they can't operate. But they can fly high altitude jets way up in the sky, 80,000 feet or more. We have satellites up there. Work just fine. So we have all the technology supposedly to conquer high altitude, cold weather. But no one's able to put anything together. And we can fly supplies to the Antarctica. Granted it's on the edge. But isn't it strange that there's no television show, billionaire, or whatever that has said, okay, I'm going to quickly do 2 things. I'm going to rape the money out of flat earthers, and I'm going to body slam them on the ground by proving that this thing is a globe. and they put together, you know, I don't know, a fleet of C-130s that are completely outfitted for high altitude, cold temperatures, or they get a balloon, or they get whatever. And they fly right over the South Pole, videotaping the entire thing. I mean, what would it take to fly over a 12,000 mile wide thing? Oh, sorry, circumference, excuse me, right? It's just basically a day flight from LA to New York. That's about as far as we're talking. So, wow, we sit around and watch a video for what amounts to be about 5.5 hours. And boom, the world's flat. Boom, the world's round. Why isn't anyone going for this? Seems like a very quick way to make a buck. And then the whole world goes, ah. Or this shit flies into a firmament dome wall and we all go, oh my God. Check that out. So for those hanging on around, I would say, why hasn't anyone done that? And you know, you might say, oh, because it's stupid. Hey, if you think there's a big group of stupid people out there, there's nothing more satisfying than, I guess, taking all their money, right? So there you go. Put sponsorship in this thing, and everyone will continue watching. Then the headline will go out, "The Earth is round." Or the other. Anyway, I think you get what I'm saying here. I just wanted to put a quick sort of update out there. I don't know if I'm going to use a number or just make it a special report. I just want us to kind of, you know, stop what we're doing and trying to find out or prove that it's flat or round, or, you know, globish, and take a look at what we're doing. You know, are we still on track? Are we becoming an acidic group of people, one way or the other? Is that where we really want to be? And so on and so forth. So anyhow, deepthoughtsradio.com for all the feeds. There's video if you're on audio, audio if you're on video. That's all I'm saying today. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.